friends. So this is the last video in this little series. I'm probably gonna post a reading vlog at some point towards the end of the week, which is gonna have me read a bunch of romance books, but that won't be up till like Friday or Saturday, depending on when I'm done with it. But I want to pop in and just go over what are my favorite reading tropes, reading romances, and what tends to come to mind. And just my general feelings about romance reading. I will be super honest, I was not a big romance reader until maybe like 10 years ago, I would say. Right when I got out of college. I actually blame Hypable, which has sadly closed its doors. But if you want to follow the people that got me into romance reading, you can follow Subjectify Media. And it is run by Karen, Kristen, and a bunch of the other people from Hypable. And they are the people that got me into romance reading because they introduced me to Katie McGarry, Morgan Matson, and that is sort of how I found all my romance recs back in the day. But before I started reading romance, I was a big fantasy reader. And the problem with me in fantastical reads is there was always a love triangle. Any book you read in the early 2000s always had a love triangle, and without fail, I always fell for the wrong side of that. Perfect example, I loved Jacob in Twilight, and no one loved Jacob. Bella didn't obviously love Jacob either, but I always fell for the wrong side of it. And I think that's because I had tropes that were not popular. So I never won. Like, my side never won. I think I won once, and that was with the Hunger Games, because I really did like PETA, which is so ironic because Gale is like normally my trope that I love, and I just didn't like Gale. But the tropes that I tend to like is friends to more, and couples with like a long history when they're best friends to more tends to be tropes that I really, really like. Now, those tropes are very common in contemporary books. They're not that common in fantasy books because whenever you read a fantastical book, these two characters come together they've never met, and then the girl ditches her best friend and goes to the new guy. That's what I was reading it, and I would get so frustrated. But then when I started reading contemporary, I found a lot of books that did do those tropes. So I guess it's a little bit of a split bag. But my favorite trope of all time is hate to more, focusing on rivals. But specifically, there has to be like history there. And the best story that I can tell you are two that I've read recently, and one is Today, Tonight, Tomorrow by Rachel Lynn Solomon. Here's a photo. A lot of my favorite tropes, but the heart of it is that they are academic rivals. It is set in one day, which is another trope that I really, really like. There's a contest or a game involved. And they both competed, and one gets named valedictorian and one gets like second valedictorian, but they have competed their entire lives. And it is a very deep rivalry, but when they're sort of forced to compete in this game together, their barriers sort of come down. It also has great Jewish representation. This is probably one of the first books I read that had that. I read a lot of other ones since that, but definitely a book that was like representation wise I really liked. But I just felt like even though we only met these characters in this book, there was flashbacks to why they had so many issues with each other, and then there was like found documents that sort of like fleshed it out. But it was great. And even though this book is only set in one day, I felt like you got a lot of information, and those flashbacks really, really helped. I really liked both characters. There was a lot of Jewish history with their story, and I just love the travel elements. They were running around Seattle playing Assassin, which is a game I used to play at my summer camp. I think they called it like Howl, but it's like how we used to play Assassin. And I loved it, and I'm really excited. I read her sophomore book and liked it. I didn't love it as much, but her next one is sort of in the same vein as Today, Tonight, Tomorrow, has another similar concept, and I'm really excited for it. But then the next hate to more that I have to give you is one that I have read 3 times. Definitely my most read contemporary, and that is Tweet Cute by Emma Lord. Classify this as hate to more because it sort of gets a little bit more intense as the story goes on. But you basically follow these 2 characters, and they are, one is her mom runs a big a big brand food restaurant, and Jack, who's the male character, his family owns a deli. But when it's revealed that their grilled cheese recipes are very, very similar, the teens go on Twitter and have a Twitter war, and they're sort of constantly competing. So their love to more, like their hate to more, kind of gets developed as this book goes on, but it does exist previously as well, and you just sort of see them pulling from their history. This book also does have a You Got Mail retelling, which I also really, really love. It is just a delight. I talked about this a lot previously because I really do love this book and wish I could reread it for the first time. But it also does have that hate to more banter that I really do love. And I think Emma Lord's writing style is really, really good. Also, her newest book that I just read, When You Get a Chance, also does have hate to more elements to it. But out of those 2, I would say Tweet Cute is definitely my favorite, just for the intensity of the rivalry that they meet. But yeah, so the next trope I am going to chat about is friends to more. Definitely a carryover from my fantasy reading, but I like when characters have a long history and sort of develop into romance, because maybe it's just like I like a slow burn story. I don't like a too slow burn story, but I do like a slow burn story that sort of like gets me invested in the romance. I also like when there is a history to pull from. Like, I just read a book recently called How Not to Fall, by an author that I just picked up, and I really did like that one. It also had friends to more representation. But it really is important to me that these characters do have a relationship. It's been a long-term relationship, and they do deal with the complexities of it. The best one that I can remember, well, they're friends, but they had a little bit of a falling out, is Lola and the Boy Next Door, because they do have that history, even though it is way in the past. But the couple of books that I am going to recommend is Better Off Friends by Elizabeth Eulberg. I loved how Elizabeth Eulberg did this story, because you're basically going through 4 years of a relationship with these 2 characters as being best friends. And in between every single chapter, you have these 2 characters having a conversation in the future, sort of developing how they got together. And I love the structure of this story so much. Like, it was perfect. I flew through this book. I loved it. I love the relationship. And I think that's sort of like the one that I read recently, How Not to Fall. They really did give credence to, like, what happens if we break up after we do this? And I thought that that was a really interesting conversation to have. I also really loved the structure of the book, but just that their relationship was very, very fun, and that is why it is on this list. And then I'm also going to chat about Amy and Roger's Epic Detour, which is also by Morgan Matson. But this was sort of a little bit of hard to framework, but they do know each other, and they have had a history. Again, sort of like Lola, there is a little bit of a falling out, but that is why I'm going to chat about this one. Amy's dad passes away in a car accident. They are moving to a new town, and she has to sort of recruit Roger to sort of like take this trip with her. And they definitely get more than their bargain for. When you do read Morgan Matson, you do see these characters again and again, like in future books. I will say that when you read her newest book, there is a little bit of a shocker with this book, so just go into that knowing if you're going to read that. But I love this story. It was like the first book I read that was also really like mixed media and had mixed media elements. But I also did really like Amy and Roger's, like, they're just their story and their progression, and it was really, really fun. But yeah, so those are my 2 favorite tropes overall. I also do like books that have like a list or a competition. A couple ones I'll just mention is Since You've Been Gone by Morgan Matson does have a list element where they're trying to do it. I just also finished The Lucky List by Rachel Lippincott, which also did have a list. And a book that has like a competition. I read Taste of Love by Jennifer Yen. And any other book that has like a baking competition. Love from Scratch I also read recently that had a baking competition. So I hope you guys are liking this video and that I gave you guys some recommendations. Comment below some books that you think I would like based on these tropes. And I will talk to you for my next video. Bye, friends.